I have you now.
They want to mess with my droid. They're going to pay for it.
This is the way.
You may fire when ready.
Blow that piece of junk out of the sky!
The way you're fighting, you wouldn't have lasted long.
Hello there.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
We knew that the gap between Survivor and Ahsoka was coming, but do not worry because we've got some life rafts for this Star Wars. Well, I was going to say drought, but life rafts and drought aren't really the same analogy. We've got some content to fill up the time between Survivor and Ahsoka because we knew that there was going to be a drought on this content. So we've got some nice raindrops of Star Wars. That's a better analogy. Last week, Return of the Jedi turned 40 years old. So we talked about Return of the Jedi. Colin and I put together a big episode just about everything surrounding Return of the Jedi. We watched it all the way through. We provided commentary for the whole thing. Really just a long-form movie commentary episode that we really enjoyed putting together.
Well, that was a lot of fun.
I had a great time. You know, Indiana Jones is coming at the end of June. We've got some stuff in the can for that. We're really excited. Indiana Jones is, it's a Lucasfilm product. It's so inexplicably tied to Star Wars that, of course, we're going to cover the new Jones movie on our Star Wars podcast. But, the downtimes between these Star Wars releases have really allowed us on this podcast to focus on some niche stuff that we have a lot of fun with. Weeks ago, we came to you guys with a History of Star Wars board games episode, and that was a lot of fun for us to put together. It was a lot of fun for us to sit down and talk about our favorite Star Wars board games and how board gaming has changed surrounding Star Wars over the last 40 some odd years. And, we've got another episode like that today. We're not pulling back into the Star Wars history books so much out of universe, but in universe, that's exactly what we're doing. We are going to delve into the newly released Star Wars timeline. At Celebration London, there was a new Star Wars timeline released that has new dates that didn't exist in the Legends continuity, or dates that have since been reintroduced into this canon timeline from the Legends continuity. And so we just have had a lot of thoughts spinning about this since that announcement at Celebration. And we really thought, with the Timelines book coming out a few months ago, maybe a month ago, that this is the perfect time for us to sit down and talk about the new Star Wars timeline. And so we are super excited to jump into it right now. And I wouldn't jump into it without first introducing my co-host, the Hostnian historian himself, Colin Archer.
Hey, Carter. Man, another episode in the books. I'm ready to get into this. I've got a lot of thoughts that has to do with this whole gamut of the existence of this galaxy and I guess primarily how the Jedi relate to it, or even not. That's what's so fun about this, But just glancing at this thing, it focuses primarily on the Jedi and how they shape things. So it's fun to think about that, and I hope we get into a little more than just talk about Jedi, or Force users.
Oh, yeah. I think we're going to be able to sit here and talk about all of everything that's going on in this new universe, everything that's going on in the canon, and with this new timeline. They were really, really excited to unveil this timeline. As you know, Colin, as our listeners probably know, this timeline was unveiled at Star Wars Celebration in London, and they put it on the big stage. They did it alongside the new movie releases, which was really exciting to get some kind of cemented time frames, some cemented dates. It's very similar to the timeline that you see printed in the cover of old Legends books, or that you now see printed in the cover of canon books. And this is going to allow us to fill in those gaps even more. And so the eras are structured really interestingly, and that may be the first thing that someone notices when they look at the timeline. And for those listening, on the day this episode premieres, we are going to have the timeline up on our Instagram story just so people can see it and kind of know what we're talking about. If you're not listening to this the day it came out, or you don't have that timeline handy, all you need to do is go into Google, search up Star Wars Celebration London timeline, and it's going to pop up, and it's just got a black background with white symbols that show you the whole gamut of the timeline. But like I said, the first thing you'll notice about this timeline is that the chunks of time and the eras, as we'll call them, in quotes, are widely variable. I mean, there are eras that span 400 years. There's an era that spans 5 years. There's an era that spans thousands of years. And so, Colin, that's the first thing that I recognized about this is what do you think about the giant disparity between how Star Wars is defining eras?
Gosh, that's kind of a deep question. I mean, you got the three eras that primarily the movies look at, and they span large gaps and take place over short periods of time. When you're looking at each individual series, right, each individual trilogy, there's gaps in between, but really the original series takes a long time, and the prequels take quite a long time, even more, I guess. But then the sequels take almost no time. So it's exactly like you said. It's kind of strange in a sense when you're looking at this other stuff, like all these other ones are like vast amounts of times. Age of Rebellion compared to the Old Republic or the High Republic is extremely short, and then even shorter still is the Rise of the First Order. So, I'm trying to think of like maybe if you were standing and there's this infinitely long wall, and that wall represented time. We're only looking at this real tiny little bit relatively, but it's going to have these really nice, fun gaps that we can play around and for creators to fill in all the blanks with. Well,
the Star Wars universe and the timeline has always been a little convoluted. And, George's famous for, it took about this much time. Jon Favreau delivers in interviews. He's like, 1 or 2 years. Like the people who are cranking out the high-level folks at Lucasfilm, whether it was in the George era or it's in the Disney era, they're not sitting here like us nerds going, well, it happened on this date, and so this many hours between this event must mean that this happens. And so, I mean, you watch The Empire Strikes Back, and you already see it's, how long did Luke train with Yoda versus how long were Han and Leia in the asteroid field. And so these kinds of things, I mean, this was the same in the Legends timeline, and it's the same in this timeline, but it's still interesting. Jason Fry, who has been a longtime Star Wars contributing author, has made comments when Disney had the acquisition, started the new canon timeline, that he was excited that the timeline might get cleaned up. Because you think about real-world human recorded history, we've only got a few thousand years of history. Well, Star Wars, at the dawn of the Jedi era, which is 25,000 years before the events of the movies, you've already got hyperspace technology of some kind. You've already got like way exceeding our real world timeline of technology that, they have technology that is, part and parcel in Star Wars that exists 25,000 years before the movies. And so they've got this giant beast of a timeline that they have to deal with where, some of the events on this calendar, each of the eras, like you said, spans 4 years, or the Rise of the First Order is an extremely short period. And then you have, at the very other end of this, you have the 25,000-year gap of the dawn of the Jedi period. And these time discrepancies are really interesting in the way they're recorded because you have some blips on the radar that you got to think, the First Order Resistance War, it only lasted a year. And you got to think that the real hot and heavy part of the Galactic Civil War only lasted 5 years. And so you have these extremely important flashpoints in the Star Wars timeline. First Death Star getting destroyed, second Death Star getting destroyed, Starkiller Base being destroyed. These things that are clearly big events because they're being played out on screen. There's something that we're seeing, and they happen over a short period of time. But then you have the High Republic, which lasts over 400, 500, 600 years. It's a multi-century timeline. And the way that it works out in the High Republic era is there are many major events happening here, but they didn't section them off that way. So I think the first thing that as a fan you have to look at this timeline and say is you cannot look at this and say, oh yeah, this is also the in-universe explanation of time. Like this is how they section out these things in-universe. The High Republic is an era in-universe, but that's pretty much the only one I think is an in-universe what they would call an era of their own history versus what's easy for us as readers and viewers and listeners and game players to understand as a timeline.
Yeah, great points. Is that those flashpoint things is I mean, we talk about BBY and ABY, right? Is the most overt thing that you can talk about when you're talking about this timeline that we're going to be used to talking about the most before the Battle of Yavin and after the Battle of Yavin. And that's one thing, surely when like the after the Holdo maneuver, before the Holdo maneuver, we'll probably get some flack for making that. But that was the Resistance suffered some hurt after that, but they came back, and really it's after Exegol or before Exegol or something like that. You could argue is even bigger flashpoint than something that happened at Yavin. And do these in-universe characters go by that time designations? I don't know.
That's exactly what it is. You're exactly right. Is that why would you ever expect an in-universe person to go by BBY? I mean, those are for our convenience. They centered them around A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie, because that's what regular listeners and viewers and everybody are going to want to center their events on, is when were the events of A New Hope, and this is how we'll make our timeline. But if you were an in-universe historian, you wouldn't sit there and say that the destruction of the second Death Star was worth dating your entire calendar around. I mean, that in the real world, it's measured around the birth of a major religious deity. It's not the same thing as in this Star Wars universe where they would date it around one battle. If anything, the Battle of Jakku would start the New Republic calendar. And so to expect the in-universe people to go off of the BBY and ABY designation that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, so that's expected. That ABY, BBY is just for us. But my point is, obviously, there's bigger events. And I think to your point also, in the High Republic and Old Republic, all this other stuff, surely there are some big events that took place that if we were focusing solely on that era, we'd make some sort of date designation or something, right?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. Like, you have to think to those characters. One, you can't record it BBY, ABY, because before the Battle of Yavin, things happened, and Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars is not measuring dates on an event that takes place in 20 years. And so they have in-universe calendars. The Republic goes off of, the calendar surrounding the Ruzan reformations. Then you have the Empire that goes off of the calendar, obviously based around the formation of the Empire. And so, just like in our real world, there are multiple different calendars and multiple different ways to measure time and different year zeros for different groups of people. It's the exact same in the Star Wars universe. I mean, you can only expect what year zero is on some planet. I mean, there's some random planet out there that, let's say the people who live on Mustafar, they must have some kind of calendar based around a date, that something that happens on that planet. Why are they going to change? The Mustafarans can still keep their calendar. So, just all of that to say that the concern around Star Wars timelines and the way that they measure eras, I've seen people talk online, and I've seen a bunch of discourse about how the new timeline's a little weird. Well, I don't think that's really the case, because obviously it's just for the ease of the readers. It's just for the ease of the storytellers, for us to neatly be able to say, oh, well, this story fits into this. This story fits into this.
Yeah, excellent points. Couldn't have said it better.
The first story point that we get is the year 25,000. In the New Timelines book, they say the year 25,005, approximately, because this is when the Jedi are formed, and it's the dawn of the Jedi, and that's what the era is named after. Now, the dawn of the Jedi era, as far as this timeline is concerned, is 25,000 years long, maybe about 20,000 years long. And so to really get a grip on what that means is the early history of the galaxy is all kind of tied up into this. And we don't have anything published in this part of the timeline. We don't have any story being told in this part of the timeline. We only have allusions to this part of the timeline in other media. An artifact that Dr. Aphra will discover will relate back to this, or there was this that happened, or the Republic was formed approximately 20,000 years ago. And so when you say things like that, you have events placed into this timeline, but we're not getting actual stories in this timeline yet.
Yeah, and for what they've hinted at, I'm so pumped for this. I think we've had and covered a couple of tidbits here and there. I'm having trouble recalling what they are, but we talked about Jeddah and these fallen statues that we get to see, and maybe we're going to get to see these things being erected and what Jeddah means as a some Jedi integral planet or some temple world or something like that. That I'm just really pumped. And so much of this stuff, there's so much opportunity. The first lightsaber that's ignited or something like that. What I'm really hoping for is the Force is guiding a person to do these things, right?
Right. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's like there is so much to tell here. And in the Legends continuity, they did a really good job of nailing down the aesthetics of different time periods. Of, in the Dawn of the Jedi era, it's like ships are like, they're still spaceships and they still are spacefaring, but they look wooden, or they have a like a almost sails look, like solar drag fins, things like that make this look. It's obviously still modern to us, and it's obviously still Star Wars and science fiction, but they're able to add elements of an ancient feel to things that are still spacefaring, an ancient feel to people still using laser swords, an ancient feel to people still using starships. And that's something that they did really well in Legends that I hope can transfer into the new continuity. We are going to have our first entry into this era, and my prediction is it'll explode after that. We're going to get James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi movie. And after that, there's no telling where they run with the stories in this era, because it's 25,000 years before the Skywalkers. The Jedi Order could rise and fall 60, 70, 100 times in that time period, and it would still be fine, because in the span from Revenge of the Sith to the Rise of Skywalker, the Jedi Order fell twice, and that's only a 40-year period or a 60-year period. And so there's no reason to say that there's this section of the timeline maybe excites me the most, because it seems the least bound by anything. It seems like the least bound. Like they have to keep their hands off of a couple stories. There will never be a galaxy-spanning empire in this period until the Galactic Empire, because it was the first one to be able to unite the galaxy under one empire. But that doesn't mean there can't be massively major empires and important events that happen during this timeline.
Yeah, and one thing that we can't ever leave out about any of this stuff is just us as, right-minded, we want to do good things type people. When we think of the Force, it's really easy to fall into a trap of the Jedi. Well, that's not what the Force is. There's an opposite to the light side, is the dark side. And so what's really going to be a lot of fun also in this Dawn of the Jedi thing is might be a, if this is like, are they using the Force? Is it just discovering the Force? Or is it the organization of the Jedi, right? Are they going to be like simplistic Force users or something like that? And then that means the opposite side of the coin is Dawn of the Sith. And so what are we going to see about that?
Right.
And obviously that's going to be the draw. And I hope if they're sticking to trilogies with this stuff, we're going to start with the Dawn of the Jedi, and then the Dawn of the Sith, and then the third is the Clash of the Force or something like that. That's going to be amazing. And then you talked about media. Star Wars, as fun as they are, as profit-making as they are, it's not just about movies. It's about books. It's about comic books. It's about tabletop games. It's about sitting around with your friends having a conversation. It's about podcasts. And so, we're living in the best time to discover and be part of a whole new enterprise of Star Wars media. It's so fun.
You're absolutely right. I mean, to just kind of put into perspective how fertile the ground is for this era is if you take the Timelines book, so the early history period, the Dawn of the Jedi time period in the Timelines book is only 2 pages long because there's not very much. But if you take out, they didn't give the Old Republic its own section in the Timelines book for multiple reasons. One of the reasons is the book came out before that timeline was probably even existed, or not the book didn't come out, but the book was well into production before that timeline probably even existed. And so they don't have a separate Old Republic section. But if you take out all of the events that would happen during the Old Republic section if it existed, the Dawn of the Jedi section of the book is only 3 excerpts that are about 20 words each. So there's less than 100 words that we have about the context of this 25,000 to 5,000 timeline section.
Yeah, that's wild to think about. And then there's so much more. Like, this is where their most fertile ground is, this and the opposite end of the spectrum, because it's more modern than what we're used to. But, I mean, what else we need to cover with this Dawn of the Jedi?
I think that, I think we've touched on it. Like you said, a bunch of the ancient planets really need to play a hand in this era. We need to see Octo. We need to see Jeddah. We probably need to see Moraband. We need to see some planets that have to do with this time period. We need to see the ancient planets in Star Wars. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if in James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi, we visit Coruscant and it's this lush, green, mountainous planet because, there's no city to be built there yet. Right, I just have a lot of, like we've said already, we're already beating a dead horse on this one era, and that the ground is so fertile that they can just tell so many interesting stories. The galaxy can look totally different. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
And I mean, and the first lightsaber ignition there is, that's the end of one of the movies. Oh, that's what does it for me.
The next era on the timeline is one that is super interesting, not just in universe, but out of universe. And that's the Old Republic era. And so if you had a fan favorite era, I wouldn't say this is hands down every Star Wars fan loves the Old Republic. I mean, even before Disney came along and there was a new canon, and when I was still just an avid Legends reader, and at the time they were just the Star Wars canon, when I was reading those, I very rarely touched Old Republic stuff. That just wasn't my cup of tea. I was much more post Return of the Jedi, reading a bunch of stuff about that era. And so this era was not something that I was bought into, but thousands and thousands of Star Wars fans are. There is a deep love for the Old Republic era, spanning from the KOTOR games, the Darth Bane trilogy, the KOTOR books, the SWTOR MMORPG that's still being made today. There are people that really, really care about this era, and that's a big reason that we haven't seen Disney touch it in the last 10 years, is that you've got to be very delicate with the Old Republic era. So I would say almost on the complete other side of the coin, on the complete other side of the coin, that this era may be the most, I don't want to say stilted, because that's not the right word, because they can still tell really good stories here, and they can retell stories here from KOTOR, from the Darth Bane books. There's a lot of room for storytelling here. But it may be the one, it is certainly the one I would say with the highest expectations. And so they have to tread so carefully in this era that this is the first acknowledgement, to my knowledge, from Lucasfilm and from Disney of this era, other than mentions of the word Old Republic in different comic books. Like Luke Skywalker may discover something and someone is like, oh, that is from the Old Republic. But the Old Republic existed until the Empire came about. The Republic in the Clone Wars is the same Republic as in the Old Republic. It's not in the Old Republic era, but it's the same government. And so having this be only ever alluded to on the page in real, just scarce sentences here and there in random different books, for them to finally put the Old Republic on the screen, just to say we're gonna tell stories here. We promise that this is an era in and of its own. We're gonna tell stories here, was still pretty bold, I thought, of Disney, and it's been 10 years since they've had it.
Yeah, this era, you put it so well, Carter. It's so rich. It's so established. And so you can't mention this era without mentioning Darth Revan. Revan. What Revan, right? This is one the age-old, how do you pronounce things conversation. But this character is so loved. Let me put this into perspective. There is a Lego minifigure that the Lego company put out, 500-2123. Like, you can buy it off Amazon today for $450. Or if you go back over to eBay, it's $300. And so the point is that this stuff that's not even canon, right? I mean, it's video games and books, right?
The only acknowledgement of Darth Revan at all in canon is one of the Star Destroyer legions in The Rise of Skywalker is named after him. And that has been the only name drop we have for the character in the last 10 years that Disney's owned the company and owned the IP.
So, yeah, only has a spaceship, but that means he's there. And so many people. I remember, thanks for jogging my memory on this. I remember when that was discovered, big conversations about this, lots of excitement. And it's not, so Riven is one thing, but like there's HK-47, Darth Malak, and that game. I played that game. I remember when it came out, a bunch of my friends played World of Warcraft. We all switched and played Knights of the Old Republic with Darth Malgus. He was the big bad at the time. And it was so fun to play those characters because you could do a dark side track and a light side track. I haven't played it in a long time. I bought the collector's edition when it came out, thinking it was going to be worth a bunch of money. But, and this is another thing that, I would say that this is fertile ground too, but if you went to erase some of these characters or do something outlandish with them or something, you're going to have some sort of populist revolt or something that people aren't going to be happy with.
I think you're right. I mean, not to jump to the next era, but when the High Republic got announced for the first few hours or maybe the first couple days, I mean, people were up in arms because they thought that it meant the Old Republic was being replaced. And some people still do think that, which is pretty ridiculous. When Legends was being printed, the 1,000 years, the 1,000 BBY to 32 BBY was pretty much devoid of stories. You have the Darth Bane trilogy setting up the rule of two, and then you had the Darth Plagueis book, 80 years before the Battle of Yavin, approximately. And so this whole giant timeline gap in Legends was just that. It was an actual gap. We had no information there. It was like some creatives were a little nervous about telling stories in that time period because, that's the time period that is really building up towards Palpatine's reign and rule. And so Disney saw that as an opportunity to create the High Republic section of the timeline, and so they're not the same thing. But to continue to talk about the Old Republic section of the timeline, it's still a multi-thousand-year time period. I think it stretches from 5,000 BBY to 1,000 BBY, if not farther, or if not more than that. And so there's a lot of stories to tell there. During that time period in Legends, the Sith were a viable, not nation, but government. They controlled multiple systems. At points of that, the Sith ideology wasn't even outlawed, or at certain points, they were the rulers of the galaxy. It's like, those are stories that a bunch of people are going to find super interesting and are really, really want to see told. But also, it gives us such a different perspective on Star Wars. I always call it the Lord of the Rings era of Star Wars because you got these giant battles and you got these many, many knights and many people who are extremely powerful, and it's not the same kind of conflicts that are set up in the rest of the Star Wars timeline, where even during the Clone Wars, it's, there's thousands of Jedi and only a couple Sith. Well, this is thousands of Sith and thousands of Jedi, and it's just a lot more Game of Thrones. Yes, exactly. It's a lot more Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, and it's the most fantasy-esque of Star Wars. I think it's the part of Star Wars that is, you could say, is the most space fantasy of anywhere in the whole genre, is the Old Republic era.
It's why they've set that game, the Knights of the Old Republic, because, for lack of a better term, Jedi were a dime a dozen. And that was the Star Wars Galaxies game. The producers of that game felt that was an issue. When the game first came out, you had to discover your Jedi character, and it was arduous. Very few people actually did it, and the developers made it easier over time. But even when it switched to a new system where anybody could be a Jedi, that divided the community and caused a lot of people to quit. And so their answer was this Knights of the Old Republic, or not Knights of the Old Republic.
No, you're right. Yeah, KOTOR.
KOTOR.
Yeah.
And so anybody could be a Jedi, and it fit within universe. You didn't have to be either. That was the fun of it. But yeah, and like I said before, you could choose light side and dark side, and it made the world work, because then you got to take part in this galactic civil war that was raging.
Well, and that's why people are so invested in that part of the timeline, is because it gives us a different look into Star Wars. Like we're saying, it shows you just like a different, there's a bunch of people out there. Everyone wants to be a Jedi, or we want to see these large-scale battles with giant Force users, and that has its place in the Star Wars timeline. Again, I wasn't the Old Republic guy during Legends, and I'm actually really, really excited, because one of the reasons I never got into the Old Republic era was I felt like it was going to be climbing a mountain. I felt like there was so much content in that era that I was completely unfamiliar with, that it was going to be an arduous task just to get caught up. Well, now it's a completely clean slate. I mean, eventually we may see that Knights of the Old Republic remake game, and I'll certainly play it. And eventually we're going to get new stories published during the Old Republic era. And so I will be able to get introduced to this era at the same rate that I've been introduced to the High Republic era, which is as it's happening and as it's coming out in a much more manageable way. And so I'm really, really excited about the prospect of them returning to the Old Republic, because now I get to be an Old Republic fan. And I didn't get to be an Old Republic fan back in the day because I just wasn't willing to invest the time.
Yeah, I remember when not the Revan game came out, Knights of the Old Republic. Gosh, what a time! I'm sorry you weren't there, but oh my goodness, Carter, getting to play that Star Wars RPG, doing all the things, Coruscant and all this, it was insane to get to experience that, and the reveal, everything, and so the potential for them to get to remake that and get it put into canon is such a huge thing. Me personally, I don't think they could do it soon enough. I hope that comes to fruition in a major way and gets, video games wasn't talked about this much at this last celebration. They had tabletop games. Atomic Mass had their own panel, but it was weird because Jedi Survivor was about to come out. But hopefully in Japan, when this game has got all its polish on it, and when the next Jedi Survivor / Fallen Order, whatever the next one is, they'll have a really good video game panel. And there's a lot of Star Wars games in the works, and that's what's fun about them, is they can pull from all these different eras, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I'm really excited for the era. Like you said, the sooner they get to it, the better. But I do definitely want to. Just again, I'm not a rabid fan about the Old Republic era. If they changed something major, I would probably have no idea. I mean, I know obviously about the Old Republic era in the broad strokes. I know Revan and Malik's story. I know about Darth Malgus. I know the Darth Bane story. Like, I'm aware of all of these touch points that they're going to need to satisfy, because all of those characters are such fan favorites. Nihilus, they're going to need to hit all of these Sith that, and I wouldn't say that they're neglecting, but that haven't been touched on yet. And I want them to do it right, because I don't want the divisive fan reaction. I would love for the KOTOR remake to come out, or for the first story in the Old Republic era to come out, and everybody love it. I mean, wouldn't it be so refreshing for just everyone to agree that, oh, this is great, like they did such a good job. And so I'm really, while I definitely share I hope it's as soon as possible, I hope that they take their time with it also.
Right. Anything else in this area we need to cover? I mean, I think we got it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we've got it nailed down. The next era to talk about is one that I've been pretty excited about. And this one's going to be really interesting to talk about, because the project is wrapping up next year. And so this era, in early 2025. So this era is the High Republic era. I already touched on this era was not written in the original Legends continuity. There was basically nothing there. This is certainly a divergence from what the original story in place there was, which was thin already. Now we've gotten hundreds of characters in this era introduced in the last couple years. We've gotten some fan favorite characters introduced here. We've had this era impacting other stories. I mean, it's come up in the Star Wars comic book run. It's obviously come up in Jedi Survivor. And so this era is making big ripples across the Star Wars universe. It's doing it really organically because obviously they started it with the novels as a publishing initiative, and it's grown from there. It's comics and audiobooks and all of this stuff mixed together. And so to see it all come together and to see it all become one big story that's being told over a long period of time has been really, really exciting. And so I like to see the way that they've done this story, that they've sectioned out this 400-year time period, and the way they did it was the first phase was told at a certain time, then they went back 150 years. Just like George Lucas went back with the original trilogy to the prequels, they went back and told a prequel story for the High Republic era. And now they're telling their third phase is going to come back and tell the third part of the story, back in where we started the story at in phase 1. And so seeing all of this coalesce into a timeline has been really, really fun. And this era just has me really, really excited for the future. And I know with the market success that this era has seen, it's a niche success. They have a really niche rabid audience. It's not that every Star Wars fan in the country is picking up a High Republic book, but for the fans that they've really captivated with this era and the fan base that they continue to grow through Survivor in the upcoming Acolyte TV show that takes place in this era, they are going to have a big group of people ready to embrace new stories in this era.
Man, Carter, I appreciate you giving me that explanation and covering all that. I haven't read any of this stuff. I've seen a couple of comic book covers. I think Yoda exists here. This is my least knowledgeable thing. Outside of that, some stuff exists here and there, but that makes me excited because I get to consume all this information and come to you with it all. Of course, in some cases, some sense, I wish I'd go back in time and we could pick these books up together. But my goodness, it's like you get to watch me open my Christmas presents and see how happy I am to enjoy this content, right?
Yep. And
it's like you said, this is so rich, so many characters, a bunch of stuff going on and then there's video games in books is where it's at. And I'm really hoping, like you said, that we can get some good movies or a TV show out of it. Well, we are getting a TV show, right?
Yeah. The Acolyte will take place at the very end of the era. At the very end of the era.
So that's the first toe in the water on this era from a video series, TV show, and I hope it delivers. I have a lot of confidence in what we've seen so far, and given the nature of the story, so I'm pumped.
Yeah, it's exciting to get to see them build this era into what it's become, into truly being the golden age of the Jedi and the golden age of the Republic. And so I've been very, very pleased with it so far, like I've said, and I look forward to hopefully continuing to be excited about it and continuing to really, really enjoy the era. And so I don't have much on what I would say, I hope that these stories get told here, or, I'm ready to take a break from this era. This one is just like, keep doing what you're doing. Del Rey's doing good with it. Lucasfilm's taking it in the Acolyte. Everyone's really firing in a direction that I've enjoyed in the High Republic. Phase 1 and Phase 2 have been neat. There's plenty of room for new stories to tell about the Jedi during this time period. And, look, I will say one thing, in that the rule of 2 is alive and well here, and we don't have any inclination of the Sith or mention of the Sith throughout these phases so far. And so, even just kind of peeking in and seeing what the rule of 2 is doing at this point would also be really, really welcome. And so there's plenty of wiggle room for stories right here.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And this is a theme throughout all of this stuff. Obi-Wan, there's a lot of good guys, and I'm not going to say it's easy to be a good guy. It's probably harder to be a bad guy because you got to stick to your morals and values, right? But for me personally, and I think for good stories in general, is having a good villain, right? And of course, we've seen this in the areas we're fixing to talk to. but what we get to discover brand new ones, like you're just talking about. And I mean, Revan, and Malgus and all these other stuff are good villains. And so where are these new villains going to be in Dawn of the Jedi? We already covered that. Mm-hmm. We know what good a villain Palpatine is. There's some other YouTubers out there who rank evilness, and Palpatine is usually on the top end of that. And so maybe there's somebody who's like this Palpatine-esque evil mastermind in this High Republic era that we'll get to see in the TV show.
Well, we've certainly already seen that. Yeah, we've certainly already seen the character of Marchion Ro in the books really turn out to be that way, in that a non-Force sensitive is able to give the Jedi such a run for their money, is able to put the Jedi against the ropes, is another reason I think that this era is so refreshing and so fun to hear stories from. Is obviously I'm interested, like I said, in what's happening with the Sith during this era, where the Rule of Two at, yada, yada, yada. But to get to see foes that the Jedi have to stack up against, problems that the Jedi have to solve that are not related to the Sith and not related to that massive good versus evil, black and white Force conflict, has been really, really fun. And I think that they've done a really good job of creating characters like Marchion Ro, like Lorna Dee, that have been fan favorites and that have also been able to hold up a mirror to the Jedi and say, we're not your opposites. This isn't the other side of the coin like the Sith, but this is a new challenge for them that is new in the Star Wars universe and is new out of the Star Wars universe as far as publishing is concerned. Is that the Nihil are a totally new wrench in the Jedi's plans and in the expansion of the Republic. And you have the Path of the Open Hand, which are another just wrench in these plans. And they've made really compelling villains that are adjacent to the Force, that have to do with the Force, but they're not Force wielders and they're not Sith. And so they've really been able to tackle something super interesting here.
Yeah, that's so much fun to get to see. I can't wait to be involved in that.
It is really exciting. It's super, super cool. The next era is finally where we get into some really familiar territory. And this is when you start to play loose with the term era. Because this era it's way more expansive than the other 5 that we'll talk about. But it's only 100 BBY to 19 BBY. So this is really the way that they're framing this is the fall of the Jedi. And I remember when this timeline was released, this was maybe the biggest sticking point that really upset, and I'll say really upset. I think the main people that were upset were clickbait YouTubers, because they were, they needed to generate some clickbait. So this is what they chose to get upset about. And they were upset that they would call this the fall of the Jedi era, which, I mean, really my question would be, what else do you call it? It's not like you're disparaging the Jedi Order. You didn't spit in Yoda's face, but what else is notable about this era other than the fact that the Jedi Order collapsed?
Our Fall of the Republic would be, but I mean, they go hand in hand, right? I mean, it's like synonyms or being pedantic about what is fallen here, because look at the New Republic. They didn't have a Jedi Order.
Right.
Look what happened to them.
Right. And that's, that's kind of the thing. It's like the fall of the Jedi, the New Republic managed to get revived in about 20-something years, 25 years. But the Jedi Order did not. And so it's a little different to sit here and say, I think they are this. I mean, obviously they're one and the same. The Republic and the Jedi fell on the same day. But that to get to, I don't know if I would venture to say that the term the fall of the Jedi is offensive. And I would certainly say that it makes sense. That's like the name of the era. That's what you should call it here. But
exactly right.
This era in storytelling is one that we're going to be super familiar with because the prequels and the Clone Wars fall in this era. So we've got hours of on-screen content. That's not to mention multiple comics and novels that take place. Really, the only dry spot of this era might be anything that happens before the Phantom Menace, up until from the end of the High Republic up to the beginning of the Phantom Menace, and even still, we've got like 3 or 4 novels that go right there also.
Right. Yeah, Darth Plagueis, right?
Well, that's in Legends. We've only got that in Legends. Well, the character, he's still there, you're right. But the novel about him is only in Legends.
Well, regardless, he's operating with Chief Palpatine or Senator Palpatine or whatever he was before he became a Naboo senator, right? They're operating completely beneath the nose of the Jedi. They're totally unaware, and that if it's their machinations or not, it's the Jedi has no idea, and that's part of what led to their downfall, arguably, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, they are hoodwinked by the Sith. This is where the dark side has had its upswell and has began to cloud their vision. I mean, we don't have a good indication of why in universe the High Republic era kind of ends around the time period that it ends at. We don't have a really good measure of why they would consider the High Republic to have ended 100 years before the Battle of Yavin. And so the High Republic era, in so far as we know out of the universe, is right around when Dooku is born, but that's not an in-universe reason for why that would exist. And so to see this change in era, you have to just assume that it's because of the rising darkness. It's because of the plan that was established for the rule of two and that Palpatine ultimately fulfilled was beginning to really come to a head at the beginning of this era. And so there's a lot of space for storytelling, again, in that we can see what the rule of two Sith were doing. Darth Tenebrous, Plagueis' master, Plagueis himself, and then you can see what's going on with the Jedi Order, what's precipitating this fall. We have the episodes from the Tales of the Jedi about Dooku's personal fall, and we can see the faults of the Republic and the Jedi really begin to shine through in those episodes, as well as in the prequels, as well as in the Clone Wars. And so anything told in this era is going to be building to that and is going to continually see the fall of the Jedi. And, maybe in 30 or 40 years of real-world time, this timeline will be completely fleshed out. But from, 100 BBY all the way to 19, where we just do see this gradual decline of the Jedi, because they're already doing a good job of that. They're just not exploring the whole area of the timeline yet. And I'm willing to say it's not like we need that many stories in that section of the timeline. A couple books. If they were able to pull the James Luceno Plagueis book from Legends and just adapt that and just make it fit into canon, it answers a lot of questions about the era. Like, just one or two things could really flesh out this whole time period for everybody.
Yeah, and I really hope we do get to see something, like pull that book back into canon, do something, because the point of fact is this is a major deal. It wasn't some, in this High Republic era, there were overt villains. In the Old Republic, it was versus the Sith. And, the war was raging. And this one, these guys are, Plagueis and Palpatine are for decades, waging this ultra high-minded, masterful, ultra secret, and Palpatine, how long did he get to train Darth Maul? He just appeared on screen. You're sitting there watching the theater, watching Phantom Menace, don't know anything about what's going on, and another Sith pops up. You're like, oh my gosh, eyes bugging out of your head. And so in my opinion, one of the biggest questions of this fall of the Jedi is, how were the Jedi so blind? Mm-hmm. And what the hard truth of it is, you got to point some fingers at some of your favorite characters. Mace Windu, Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who knows? Qui-Gon, it can go back, Sifo Dyas, however many you want. There's some characters that people love that are going to get dragged through the mud and are responsible for this.
Well, and that's where the knee-jerk reaction of people getting offended about the term the fall of the Jedi comes from, is because, you have to address Yoda's hubris. You have to address Mace Windu's hubris. You have to, see, if you as a viewer admit that Qui-Gon Jinn has a point, if you as a viewer sympathize with Tales of the Jedi Dooku, then you have to acknowledge that, Yoda and Mace and the other Jedi Masters and the Council and most of the Jedi allowed the Order to fall through complacency, through, arrogance, through whatever you can call it. And you're right, that's holding up a mirror to the characters that we really love and saying, there's something wrong with them. But if there wasn't a flaw in the characters we love, they wouldn't be good characters. And to call it the fall of the Jedi Order does not diminish Yoda's wisdom. It does not diminish his impact on Luke in The Empire Strikes Back. And you can't pin the blame on the fall of the Order on Yoda. He was a Grand Master for hundreds of years, and he stewarded the Jedi Order through a lot of different crises. I mean, it's not like you just sit here and pin blame, and that's not what anyone's doing it by calling this era the fall of the Jedi. But it is worth saying and sitting down and saying, if everything was going right, then this wouldn't have happened, so something was going wrong. And that's George Lucas's point with the prequels in the first place. And with the point of Luke, not listening to Ben and Yoda and not killing Darth Vader, and Luke throwing his weapon down and saying that he's not going to succumb to the dark side or his anger or anything, is that these characters, while ultimately good and while extremely powerful Force users and while good Jedi, had lost something along the way. And Luke found it. Luke found what they had lost, and it was their compassion. And so this whole era is full of stories to show us where that compassion got lost along the way. And there's not some flashpoint event. It's not like one day all the Jedi woke up and were like, we're in this ivory tower and we're not in touch with the rest of the galaxy. It was a slow progression. We even see this in the High Republic era.
Potentially hundreds of years.
Exactly. And so this era has some storytelling left in it. I'll be interested to hear what you say about the next era and how much storytelling is left in that, because some people will claim that rock has bled as much as it possibly can. I'm not one of those people. I might be close, but I wouldn't say it's bled as much as it possibly can. But the reign of the Empire era, what did they call it specifically? They called it reign of the Empire. I got it. Sorry. So the reign of the Empire era. So this one is very, very clearly defined. It is the second Palpatine steps in that dais in Revenge of the Sith up until the destruction of the first Death Star, up until Rogue One. Up until the end of Rogue One, we have this era defined as the reign of the Empire. It is the Empire at its most oppressive. It's the Empire growing to its most powerful. And we have got some content in this era lately. And since Disney purchased Lucasfilm, we've gotten quite a bit of content. Now, it makes total sense. Like, this is the era you can tell the Star Wars stories in. Anybody off the street is going to recognize the stormtrooper armor here. They're going to recognize the TIE fighters. They're going to recognize the rebellion. Like, it's just all of the Star Wars iconography that anyone could need is in this era. And so I'm not going to say it's easy to tell stories in this era, because it's not. I'm not going to sit here. I'm not a storyteller, and so I'm not going to be like, oh, I could do that. I will say that we have a lot of stories in this era, a lot of unique ones. I mean, the Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor games happen in this era, and it's not like you could guess what was going to happen in those or how they relate to the timeline. And so we just have a lot of content in this era. We have the 2 video games. We've got the Kenobi series. We've got Andor. We've got the Bad Batch 2 seasons. We've got the Han Solo movie. We've got Rogue One. I mean, and that's just viewing. I mean, you can't, there are comics and comics and comics, and there's all kinds of novels in this era. The next novel that Del Rey is publishing on July 18th is Inquisitor, Rise of the Red Blade. It is smack in this era. I think the book takes place over the whole era, or up until it takes place over the first 5 years of the era. And so we're getting a lot of stories here. And Colin, do you think it's time to let the era breathe for a second?
No, and I hope that never comes true in my lifetime and nor my children's. I want to elaborate on it in my moment of the week a little bit, but why does this era exist? It's because of Darth Vader, primarily. And he's the most iconic, that helmet, that face mask, that cape, that James Earl Jones's voice.
Yeah, he's the most iconic villain of all time. He is the most iconic villain in any story ever told. I would absolutely be willing to say that.
That's a little more in the Age of Rebellion of what we've seen in the original trilogy and all that stuff. But as far as looking at a timeline, this was what, 20 some odd years?
19.
And 19, yeah. And he was, along with some other characters here and there, but like, this was the person you feared if you were somebody up to no good, quote unquote, in the galaxy, and that was the bad thing. You had to put it in those air quotes because this was such a vile existence of a government that they just decided what was no good at any given moment. But when you did cross the path, Darth Vader came and your existence was over.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, yes, they're probably on screen more Age of Rebellion, what Darth Vader did. But in the strictest sense of like, this was 19 years, and the Age of Rebellion is only a few years, right? Exactly. As we're defining it from the start of Rogue One till
the Battle of Jakku. It's still Jakku, so it's 5 years total.
Darth
It's 5
Vader,
years total.
Darth Vader didn't play that part. But my point is like all this iconography you talked about, and Darth Vader and Palpatine is the head of it literally, but Darth Vader is like the enforcement arm of what that is. Mm-hmm. Flying around, doing what he does. We've reviewed the comic books on here, and that's just an inkling of what happened in this timeline. And so it's Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader's corrupted will, that is being played out here at the behest of Palpatine. And so no, this era can't end, because I will want Darth Vader stories till the world is level.
See, and that's why they'll always tell stories here, is because of your sentiment, because you're a Star Wars fan because of Darth Vader. And that's not the only reason. But, that's so many people. I mean, that's when you think of Star Wars, the first thing that you think of is Darth Vader's face. And
then Han Solo. We've only got one story with Han. Like I said at the start of this, we don't need all this. This can also, along with the next the Age of Rebellion, is a Skywalker story between Anakin and it spans these 3 eras we're talking about, is a Skywalker story, and there's so much more. You will never hear us stop talking until we see it about a Lando Calrissian story. We're going to talk to death about wanting Han Solo stories, right?
Well, some form.
This is the prime candidate for these stories of this era right here.
Some form of a sequel to Solo is just necessary. Whether that's Solo 2, hashtag make Solo 2 happen, or that is a Lando story. Like, there's so much room in this part of the timeline, like you're saying, to keep telling stories. Not that there's a lot of years to tell stories in. I mean, it's 19, and you look at a year like, 10 or 9. When you look at 10 BBY and 9 BBY, you've got the Solo movie, you've got the Kenobi series, you've got Jedi Survivor, you've got other content that sits right there in that timeline. And I'm not saying it's too much. I think that it's fine. But there are other years in this timeline. I don't know which ones. I won't pluck one out of the air for fear of being wrong. But, just for the sake of argument, say 12. Well, let's say we don't have any story in 12. They can fit a ton of storytelling there. Like you said, with Solo and everything that's going on in the underworld during this time, Darth Maul is still active, and although we've explored a giant portion of that guy's life, somehow there is still a gap. There's still a blind spot of what was Darth Maul up to between Solo and Rebels, and that story has yet to be told. And so we have a lot of space for a lot of new stories in every point in this era. And because it's the most iconic look for Star Wars is set in this era, and because we've already seen that stories of rebellion can be told in 1,000 different ways, and that the stories of rebellion start in this era. I actually, when we were listing what pieces of media are in this era, I completely forgot Rebels, mainly because it feels more like an Age of Rebellion story to me. It happens firmly in this Reign of the Empire era. It's just so rebellion focused.
Right.
But that story happens here. That story happens concurrently with Andor. Those stories could not be more different in tone, in pacing, in yada, yada, yada. And I love them both. They're both 2 of my top 5 Star Wars things ever made. And so when you look at both of those things together, I mean, I'm clearly a fan of this era. People are clearly a fan of this era. And you're able to tell these stories in so many different ways and from the perspectives of so many different people. And the rebellion on Lothal, looks different than the rebellion on Narkina 5, looks different than the rebellion on Jabeam, looks different than the rebellion on Kobo. Like, those are 4...
Or barely exist on Tatooine.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There's so much going on in the galaxy, Underworld, Empire, Rebellion, all of that building up, that there's still plenty of space in this era. And so I think you're right, that I think they can keep telling stuff here. The next era is our shortest era by years. This era is only 5 years long, and that is from 0 BBY, and we'll call that from when those Death Star plans get put in Leia's hands to the Battle of Jakku. So, you know, the Aftermath trilogy, the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, Lost Stars, all of those books that culminate, the Battlefront games, all of those things that culminate in the Battle of Jakku, that the Battle of Jakku is their big crescendo, they all exist here. And so it's a narrow era, and I will say that I don't know how well, I won't say there's not room for storytelling, because in a galaxy like Star Wars, obviously there's always room for storytelling. But as far as the people you think of when you think of the Age of Rebellion, and you think of Luke and Leia and Han and Lando, 3PO, R2, and Vader and the Emperor, and even the other secondary characters like Hera and the Rebels crew and people who are active during this time period, like, they've gotten a lot of story told here. There's a comic book that spans 75 issues just telling the 3-year story between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. And it follows the original trilogy gang the whole time. And so we know what Luke and Leia were up to the second they leave that scene in the throne room where they get the medals, all the way up until the very opening scene on Hoth. And then, between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, that's only 1 year, and they are still publishing a comic book in this time period. They have no end in sight for the Star Wars 2020 comic book. And so, when you see all of these stories churning out, and that's not to mention that the Darth Vader comic books are published in this time period, the Dr. Aphra comic books are published in this time period, the Bounty Hunters comic books are published in this time period, and these are not trade paperback 5-issue stories, 10-issue stories, you know, oh, it was a story and it's told. These are ongoing comic books. They are currently writing stories, and they're going to keep writing stories until, you know, the money stops coming in, or until they've, again, wrang all the blood out of this rock that they can. And so...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The other thing I want to mention is why it's so valuable and why we can see so much stuff in here is that this is the crew. Lando, Leia, Han, Luke, right? We want to see that crew do what they do. And that has to exist in this era.
Yeah. And, well, the reason they've given it to the medium of comic books is, you know, it's probably not the most benevolent reason. And I'm not, you know, I don't want to sit here and criticize a company or executives or creatives that I haven't been in those shoes. I don't really know what it's like. But I will say that I am pretty confident that the reason that these stories are sectioned off to comic books is because they're worried about tampering with the stories. Like, they don't feel like they have the authority, maybe not authority is not the right word, but they don't feel like they might have the goodwill of people, or they might not be bold enough to say, we're going to make an animated series between A New Hope and Empire about Luke, Han, and Leia. Like, they're not going to do that because they would be so worried about screwing something up in that people are up in arms, because it's really, really, really tough to touch the original trilogy because they're worried about breaking it. And I am happy about that level of caution, because I don't want something to get, you know, to accidentally throw a wrench in the original trilogy. And for some accident that someone overlooked, and there was nothing malicious, but that, you know, it makes these comic books harder to digest. And so since they're comics, they don't have as much worry because the reach of comics isn't as wide. And so this era, they're telling their stories here, but it can only get so big with the cast that we know. They can always introduce new characters in the Rebellion, in the Empire, in the Underworld. That's totally normal. But you always have to say, well, if this guy was so important, or if this guy was so big, why wasn't he at the briefing room in the Battle of Endor? Or why wasn't he one of the bounty hunters that was chasing Han? Or why wasn't this? Or why wasn't that? And it's like, you know, you can excuse them away. Those exist. The excuses will abound, and they'll always come because you have to always excuse. It's the same excuse of, well, why wasn't Ezra or Kanan at helping the rebellion during the movies? And it's like, okay, they had to explain that away. They had to think of a reason. They gave us a reason. And so they can always introduce new characters, but there'll always be that hanging question of, well, why weren't they in the movie? And so you focus on the characters you know in this era, Luke, Han, Leia.
Right.
And that focus has to be narrowed down to a consistent linear story told by one person, and that's where they've settled on the comics. And so
excellent points.
Expansion of this era is going to be tough. And then you even have between Return of the Jedi and Jakku, like that, I don't feel like there's any room to tell stories right there. You've got, 6 books, you've got 2 trilogies plus Lost Stars plus the video games that are telling the story, plus Squadrons are telling the story between Return of the Jedi and Jakku about the build-up towards the Battle of Jakku, and, totally makes sense. I'm totally fine with that. I have no problems exploring that part of the galaxy and what the rebellion was doing, what was going on here, but, that story is told. The way the New Republic has coalesced and the way that they've moved on is they've pretty much chunked out that era for me. I don't think that there's much more to tell about what the rebellion and the Empire were doing here. We could get some stories about how the underworld was scrambling after Jabba's death, but that's really probably it in that 1 year of this 5-year era.
Yeah, I can't really add to that. I think you said it.
Okay, well, the next era we'll move on to is the one that I would say is the section of Star Wars that they are flexing the most in, that we're getting the most content in. This is where the Filoni-verse, as people have dubbed it, takes place. This is where Dave Filoni's new film will take place, and that is the New Republic era, which was a clean slate. After Disney said, we're going to reset the canon, so it's completely clean. They got Chuck Wendig to kind of flesh out what the New Republic government was going to be like during this era and how we tie Return of the Jedi to The Force Awakens. But there's still a giant 20-something year gap right here that the stories deserve to be told, and that's what we've been getting. And they've been really successful telling us stories from the perspective of characters that, no one had heard of before they were invented. The brand new characters like Mando and Grogu get to tell us the stories in this era.
Yeah, there's a lot of upset here, too, because there's so many books that were just put into legend status, right? Mm-hmm. That people, the Thrawn trilogy came out in the 90s, and that was somebody's formative era on Star Wars, that it just went away. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of getting to see that. We're going to get to see that in Ahsoka, but it's not. What Timothy's on, it's not his story,
right?
In a sense, right? I mean, he obviously he's going to have some influence on it, and there's some really good ideas. A lot of characters that people love, like Mara Jade and stuff like that. But they were, for lack of a better term, Thanos snapped out of existence, and so there's some people who feel a strong way about that. And there's always I wish they do this, I wish they do that. But this is the world we're in. And like the Mando verse, I wouldn't trade that for anything. Those characters are so fun. We get to see so much cool stuff that interacts with, Filoni and Favreau. I feel like are really forward thinking. They, the first thing that comes to mind is Bill Burr's character. He brings up Operation Cinder towards the end of season 2 of Mandalorian. Mm-hmm. And that's a direct tie into a video game. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to get that with any movies, but maybe we will. I don't know. At the end of, we're skipping ahead. I won't do that. But a lot of this stuff, because of the world we live in, like the day this podcast comes out, there's so much opportunity. One of the big things that even we talk about here is Cal Kestis going to make an appearance in one of these later areas. We talked about him being in Reign of the Empire. Well, already to the New Republic, a lot of time has passed. Where's he at? What's his story? And so hopefully some of this stuff comes to fruition. And I love it. Fans love it. It's something I think Lucasfilm can cash in on in a major way.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And there's whole elements of this time period that have yet to be touched on. We've got, Luke's Jedi Academy. That shows up in the Rise of Kylo Ren trade paperback, and it really doesn't get touched on anywhere else. I mean, we see Luke with Grogu. We see the temple being built, but that's really it. We don't have much more information on this era or what it was like for Luke during this time period. Leia's got a pretty good story here. We've got, and there's still giant periods of her political career that we're completely unfamiliar with. And, bringing Thrawn in and having a crisis for the New Republic during this era that's not mentioned during the sequels is going to be a challenge. Hasn't been mentioned in new canon or in canon books that were printed before that idea was in someone's head. But the era is ripe for a lot of new stories. And you touched on it at the beginning of when we were talking about this era, about how this was a much beloved era for people. Like I said, it was the era I read the most in Legends, and then when it was done away with, you did kind of feel like, wow, there's all this story here that now is gone, and with the sequels, it's completely different. And, there is no Luke Mara Jade, there's no Ben Skywalker, there are the Solo twins, and their conflict didn't happen. And a lot of good stories from that time period. But as a fan of that time period, and as someone who had read a lot about that, I will say that it wasn't without its stinkers in the Legends continuity. I mean, there wasn't, I love to look on Legends super fondly because I have a ton of Legends stuff that I've read that I've really enjoyed and that I'm super fond of it, and I still read Legends stuff to this day. But I would be being dishonest if I were to say that there were not stinkers in the Legends era. I mean, people know all about them. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that happened for better and for worse in Legends. And so there are some stories in this era that I might be happy that they're not there anymore because they did kind of hamstring the story. I mean, one of the decisions that Timothy Zahn made in his trilogy surrounding Thrawn was that Ben Kenobi, in the opening chapter, it's his last visit to Luke ever as a Force ghost. And Ben Kenobi is never coming back as a Force ghost. So Timothy Zahn set an expiration date on how long people can be Force ghosts. And that's a point in the most well-received piece of Legends continuity ever, the Thrawn trilogy. That was a point that a lot of people were upset with, myself included, that why did we give this arbitrary, fuse on the ghost thing? And that was something that they didn't do in the sequels, or at least they extended the fuse. If, Yoda shows up as a ghost in that, it's longer than when Obi-Wan was a ghost in the Legends continuity. And so there were problems with the era in Legends. And so the clean slate approach was, I'm still, I'm okay with that. I'm happy that Disney came in because it was going to be way too difficult for them to try and fit stories in between the Legends stuff. But I'm super happy that the most beloved, the most successful parts of that era in Legends are making a comeback in canon in a new and interesting way. The Thrawn that we're going to get in Ahsoka is not going to be identical to Heir to the Empire Thrawn. He's not even going to be identical to the canon Thrawn that we have in the Thrawn Ascendancy books or in the canon Thrawn trilogy. Or he's not even going to be the exact same as the Thrawn in Rebels. I mean, the character has had changes. I read today a headline that said Lars Mikkelsen did not rewatch Rebels before filming Ahsoka because he wanted to kind of have a fresh perspective on this character. And he remembers his role as Thrawn during Rebels. And so he's not going to go back and revisit the whole series for it. And
yeah, that's some good news.
And so I think it's fine. I'm happy that they're bringing new characters in here. And I think there's plenty of stories to tell here. But I'm not upset at all that we're getting the old elements back, but tweaked a little bit. I think that that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, this era, I think what a lot of people want the most is more Luke Skywalker stories. At the end of Mandalorian Season 2, when that X-Wing shows up, my heart was jumping out of chest. We've talked about that so much on here. But for me, that's what I want to see the most. I'm curious what took place in that, and there's a lot that we get to see. If considering Kylo Ren or Ben Solo, if you can call that the start of the rise of the First Order, that's a big deal to see what pushed Luke over the edge there, which would take place in this New Republic.
Yes.
And so I think that's a huge story that needs to be told. We've got some flashbacks of it. That's it.
Yep.
And please, Lucasfilm, show me.
Yeah, I agree completely with you. I think that's the big thing is that Luke is the key to this era. Because of the direction that the sequels took, this is the era that you're going to get your Luke Skywalker stories in no matter what. And so before Luke's exile, they have a lot of stories to tell there. And, I hear all the time, and I'm a proponent of this, and we've tweeted about this on our Twitter multiple times, in that Luke Skywalker Jedi Academy animated series is what I want to see there. Not saying that's going to happen.
Yeah, fantastic.
I don't know best, but as a fan, that's exactly what I want there, is a new animated series, Luke Skywalker's Jedi Temple, who's, it can run 3 seasons like The Bad Batch, 4 seasons like Rebels, 7 seasons like The Clone Wars, however much they think they can get out of that with stories to tell that are new and fresh and exciting. I'm going to sit down in front of my TV every day for a Luke Skywalker TV show. That's absolutely going to happen. And so
that's what I'm doing on lunch. Exactly right.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I'd like out of the era. So we'll see. There's a lot of ground to cover there. The next era for us to talk about is the one that was Disney created. This is brand new. This wasn't something that was tread in Legends continuity. I mean, there were stories told in these years, but it is a complete divergence from the Legends continuity, and that is the Rise of the First Order era, like you had said. And so this one, I am not going to say I'm 100% confident of the dates on when it is. I think the era is a little wider than when the movies take place. The movies take place over a year. The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi being right back to back, and then The Rise of Skywalker being a year after that. And so this era, it has 3 films. And that's not it. We've got the Poe Dameron comic in this era. We've got other tie-in novels, including Resistance Reborn, the Phasma novel, and a couple other things. I'm trying to turn around and look at my bookshelf real quick to make sure I'm not missing anything major in this era. We've got the Canto Bight stories, things like that, but we don't have a lot of content in this era aside from the movies, because they did the movies and then they took a big break and they just kind of pressed pause and they were like, we're gonna evaluate what we're doing, and we haven't gotten much going on here.
So yeah, they're going to have to really put some effort into figuring out how to do some extra stuff in here. If I had to say the lowest hanging fruit for making a story here and what people would want to see the most is something to do with Kylo Ren. He has the Knights of Ren that on his flank, that I guess they go out and do their evil things, whatever that is. And I don't know if it'd be a good story, because having just a story about a bad guy doing bad things isn't really. I don't know. Darth Vader's doing it, right? So they got his comic book. So maybe there's something there with that. Of course, I think you could agree, Carter. We'd like to see more Adam Driver.
Yeah,
I know I certainly
absolutely
would. And outside of, and then of course Rey. That's what we're going to talk about here in a minute. But her story takes place after this. I would argue that we see most of her story. There's not, she's on Jakku, and then Han Solo and Chewbacca and Finn take her away, and we see almost everything that takes place here. This is so crammed into one thing that, like, we know what she does. It's not much. But Kylo Ren has some existence. Snoke has some existence before this. And then, there's so much you could do with these evil characters. And for that matter, Han Solo, you could do stuff with him. And then Chewbacca, for all we know, Grogu's tooling around here. So something's going on that we can get something out of. I think they're going to have to put their nose to the grindstone to really crank it out. But they just have to have the fortitude to get that done.
I think everything you said, absolutely right. That there is room for storytelling, especially in the prologue. We don't know a lot about Kylo Ren's time as Kylo Ren, because we've got the Rise of Kylo Ren comic, and then we've got the Force Awakens, and that the part in between is filled in a couple single issues here and there, but we haven't really gotten much out of that yet. And so There's stories to be told there. I would say one of the most fertile places for stories in this small era. It's another one that's just a few years, and I think it's more than 5. But I'm really not sure what the actual years on this era are, because it's a little fuzzy on when does the Cold War begin between the New Republic and the First Order, and when does the actual war begin? And so, one of the things they really, really should tell in this era is the story of the First Order Resistance War. And the 2 things that they really need to do out of the era is name that war something else. We cannot keep calling it the First Order Resistance War. And the second thing that they need to do is they need to define the scale of the conflict. Did the First Order overnight grip the galaxy and they were running it like an efficient empire? Or was this more of like the New Republic's destroyed, but the First Order is also not a government, so right now it's all of this is floating around on what's happening in this year on individual worlds and how are they administrating themselves and yada, yada, yada. And honestly, the Clone Wars treatment to this era may be appropriate in that give us just a couple seasons of anthology TV and tell us stories from a few different planets. Tell us stories from the perspective of multiple characters. Introduce new characters. Give us the Ahsoka Tano of this time period. Like, it doesn't have to be a Force-sensitive apprentice, but I mean, give us a new character that's in between the movies, and I'm not really sure what we should do here and where they could fill it in, but there is room to fill in. There is story to be told there between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker on what is happening with the Resistance. Oh, we also have the Resistance TV show. I would be remiss if I didn't say that fills in some good gaps. The gaps that it fills in between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker is what I'm asking for. I'm not saying that the Resistance is not a good show. It is absolutely fine. I'm very, very happy that I watched that show because it gave me new perspective on the sequels. It did fill in some blanks. It's not the Clone Wars insofar as it doesn't fill in the timeline as much as the Clone Wars does, but it still fills in gaps. And so giving us even more content right there to just kind of beef that up would really help. And please, Lucasfilm, name the war. Give us, the Clone War rolls off the tongue. The Galactic Civil War has been around forever. Give us another name. In the Legends continuity, they just went ahead and called one of the wars the Second Galactic Civil War. Just do that. Just give us a better name than the First Order Resistance War.
Yeah, you're right. It does need a better name. So what else we need to talk about in this First Order era? I mean, it was neat, but I'm anxious to talk about the new Jedi Order.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything else that has to be said about this one. I think we've definitely covered what we should cover regarding this. And so the next era is the one, like you said, you want to talk about. And everybody wants to talk about it. I think it's the most talked about era, and that's because it is as fertile as the Dawn of the Jedi era. Perhaps, even more because there are no constraints here. There's not really, we might not revisit the Sith conflict during this era, but I think that's more played out with people who are consuming media rather than an in-universe explanation. I think they could always hand-wave away why new Sith showed up. But I think maybe people want to take a break in real life here. But this era is completely wide open. We have no stories told in the era. We only have one single story that is a few pages in the Star Wars 2020 comic book run, issue 25. It was 4 short stories put together, and it was 4 different short stories told in different books by the author. So there's one about Kanan because Charles Soule wrote that. There's one about Darth Vader because Charles Soule had the successful Darth Vader run. Charles Soule also wrote the Poe Dameron comic. And so in Star Wars 25, there is a Poe Dameron story, and it's called A Eulogy for Snap, which is the funeral for Snap Wexley, who dies at the Battle of Exegol during the Rise of Skywalker. And it is the only story we have in all of canon that is told after the Rise of Skywalker, and it's still 15 years before this new Jedi Order era. So this ground is completely empty. We don't know anything about the era, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, it really is. And then I think that biggest tidbit we have, of course, is the new movie that's been teased and is about Rey's Jedi Order. Now, you can really go down into a rabbit hole on what exactly this means. Because if it's a Jedi Order, that implies to me a bunch of Jedi going around doing Jedi things. They operate out of a temple, and they go to seek to be the peacekeepers of the galaxy, right? And the hard side is Rey's having to come up with this on her own. She's having to find all kinds of force sensitive folks. There's going to be some potentially, we don't know, some sort of dark side influence, maybe. And what challenge is she going to face doing all this? And that's just from the Jedi perspective. What else is going on in the galaxy? Hopefully, the New Republic has come up with something that to fortify themselves against corruption or something.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's like you said. There's a lot to tell here because we don't have any clue. We've got characters that definitely need follow-up stories. We've got Poe, we've got Rey, we've got Finn. We've got people that we know as characters that we're concerned about in this era. We want to know about the Jedi Order. We want to know about, like you said, the New Republic. But how do we even understand? How do we even know if the government is still the Republic? We don't. What if they reverted to some kind of feudal system? And I'm not saying that actually happened, but what I'm saying is that there's so many question marks here that I think the only thing that we can confidently say is that Rey is still a Jedi and that there is a new Jedi Order. And those are it. And that's from the title of the era. That's all the clues that we even have to know anything about this era.
One thing I'll say I hope comes across is Grogu's involved somehow. Maybe Cal Kestis, maybe Ezra Bridger. I know those characters would probably be quite old. But, that's a theme of a Jedi Order is you have some elders who give some sage and wisdom advice. And hopefully Rey is a younger character compared to these other guys who can get things done. And, because Star Wars is about action, it's about relationships, it's about doing the right thing and defeating an enemy. And that's a very minor thing of what it's about, right? And so what is the big theme going to be? Like you said, it's about compassion was the original trilogy. And that's just our perspective on it, and that's the story's not only what's so ripe for what we can see here, but how this is going to impact a culture is what I hope Lucasfilm is cognizant of when they're bringing this to the table.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think there's so many places to go with this story that I'm not even going to begin to speculate, and that I am as excited for the Rey movie as I am excited for every other movie. I'm really happy to see her story continue. I want to know in what direction it goes. And so this era is so exciting because there's just no way to speculate on it. I mean, obviously we can speculate more on the Dawn of the Jedi era just because we know Octo exists. There was a Prime Jedi. Jedha exists. The Jedi had to have been formed at some point. Like, there are multiple things that we can point to and say, well, that era is going to look like this. Or that era must include this event or this thing. But for the new Jedi Order era, it is completely up in the air. We have no clue, no prerequisites.
It's a blank slate.
It is. So, I was really happy that they released this timeline at Celebration. I was actually really pumped about it because we needed a timeline that fleshed out what was going on. We needed a timeline that showed us every important point. And so now that we have this concrete outlook moving forward, I'm really, really excited to see where they go from here and that they're taking this intentional approach of telling, if you just look at the three movies, it's telling a past story in the Dawn of the Jedi, what I'll call in quotes, a present story in the Mandoverse and in Dave Filoni's new movie, because it's, that's what's going on right now in Star Wars, in and out of universe. and then a future story telling about Rey's Jedi Order in a completely untrod zone. And so it's really, really exciting to get to see all of that come together and hopefully see Lucasfilm take a really intentional direction with their storytelling on the screen.
Right.
So, Colin, that wraps up the meat of this episode. I hope everyone enjoyed listening to us talk about the new timeline and what it means for us and cover this era. I know we had a lot of fun doing it, and so thank you guys for listening. Our next segment is going to be How the Force Works.
That's not how the Force works.
This segment is ran and fueled by our patrons, and so if you are at the Patreon tier of Jedi Knight or above, you are able to ask us a question that will get answered here on the show. Can be about Star Wars, can be in universe, out of universe, anything you want. And so this is a really, really topical question. I'm really happy we got this question submitted because it really just fits perfectly with this episode. And the question is, Star Trek has a non-canon designation for books and comics. Do you think Star Wars should move to something like that? So thank you, Tristan, for the question. We really appreciate it. Colin, what do you think?
Gosh, this is a hard question. I kind of want you to answer this one first. I mean, this is, on some level, it's really important because we need to know, like, I think everybody should have an opportunity to write something in Star Wars. I mean, there's such a thing as fan fiction. You can't profit off of it. But what if it's a really good story? You should have that opportunity that maybe you get to do something with your favorite characters as a writer, and that doesn't necessarily have to be in canon.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, this, it seems like maybe a more practical thing is it just seems silly. I mean, we are living in a universe where there's mountains of non-canon stuff out there that has Legends designation. I mean, so I guess maybe the question should be more like, can new stuff be written? I mean, because that they're not allowing stuff to be written that is non-canon, right?
Right. Well, they say they're still publishing the SWTOR game, and that's Legends, and they published the Ronin novel, which is it's not Legends or canon. It's just a non-canon novel that expanded on the Vision story, and they make Visions, and so they have a comfortable spot for non-canon stories, but they're not getting cranked out near at the volume as canon stories for obvious reasons. And so it's different. From what I know and remember about this Star Trek canon is that all the way back to, and I am not a big Trekkie, so Colin, if you hear something wrong, please correct me. But all the way back to Gene Roddenberry in the 60s show, he took the approach that anyone was allowed to write something. They could come to Paramount, say, can I get the Star Trek label on this? And Gene Roddenberry's like, absolutely, because he's getting all the royalties off of it. If someone's out there writing comics and books about his characters and Star Trek characters, well, that's awesome. Go ahead. And that Gene was fine making the money, but that only stories he told were official Star Trek. And so you have a whole host of Star Trek novels, some that are really, really good, but that don't actually, in quotes, actually happen or don't have any bearing on the characters on screen or anything like that. And so it allowed Gene to tell the story he wanted, and it still allows the Star Trek writers to tell a much more narrow, linear story. They don't have to jump through near as many hoops as Star Wars authors or Star Wars showrunners who are like, oh man, well, I hope that this person didn't die in a comic book in 20 years because I really wanted to tell a story about them. Or, this and that and the other on Star Wars characters. But the universes are so different also. And even the out of universe, the way they permeate culture is completely different.
Yeah. Good points. I think it's just a balance of, how quote unquote diluted do I want this universe to be? I mean, because people are going to have some pretty wild ideas about what track a character could be. And if that gains some traction, it can influence some stuff that Lucasfilm might not want it to be.
You know what?
So it's hard. I can see it both ways.
You know what I just remembered? What was the movie that Kirk dies in? What movie does he die in?
Star Trek Generations.
Yeah, so in Generations, they killed off Captain Kirk, right? And then William Shatner went on to write a series of books. I'm really happy I remember this. William Shatner went on to write a series of books where he revived Kirk, and he told a Kirk story. Yeah. And
I've read them. They're pretty out there.
Yeah, okay, see, they're out there. But that was William Shatner. I mean, that was Captain Kirk. There's only one person in the world who knows that character better than him, and that's Gene Roddenberry. And so for Kirk to say, no, Generations was not the right way to tell Kirk's story, this is the right way to tell Kirk's story, is, I mean, it's interesting, but could you imagine if every Star Wars actor got to go in and tell these stories about their characters? I mean, they would be good stories. I'm not out here to say maybe Ewan McGregor isn't a stellar author, or that Anthony Daniels doesn't have hundreds of years worth of C-3PO tales. I'm sure he could tell, but that they're out there writing these stories and they're totally disconnected. But fans who want to enjoy them can sit down and still enjoy them, and that can be their headcanon for the character.
Right. So let me interject one thing. In the most recent Picard TV show, there's some really cool information about Kirk that brings back the potential for more story.
Okay, cool.
It's fun. I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, well, normally, we're cool with spoilers on here, but I explicitly am trying to avoid Picard spoilers because I want to watch it eventually. So I appreciate the kindness to me there. Maybe not to our listeners who, I don't know. This may have been too much Trek already on the Star Wars podcast.
Yeah, blasphemy.
But yeah, I don't think I will say, and I'll finish with this, is that Star Wars has its canon timeline for a few reasons. One, because the interconnectedness of the universe, because of how lived in the universe feels. Star Trek does not have the same lived in universe feel as Star Wars. The Star Trek universe feels real, but you're never like, man, I wonder what was going on with, what's that guy's name? Mudd, before or after he shows up in these TV shows. It's like, he's here for the show and then he's gone. And then the Star Trek characters between TV show episodes, they obviously reset. There's some character growth over the long game of The Next Generation, but especially in the original series, it's event happens, we're back on the bridge. We're back to it's all how it was. It's back to form every episode. And so Star Wars is way more, I'm not going to say it has way more character development or depth. I don't believe that's true. I don't think either franchise has, they've got it up on this one as far as character development goes. But what Star Wars has is it has these long linear stories where singular events in these people's lives are going to be carried with them and throughout, and it had an impact on them.
Right.
And that's something that Star Wars' singular canon timeline can only tell. That Star Trek it's a little different because of the medium that it's told through. Star Trek is just TV. They have video games, they have books, they have comics, but it's mainly just television, whereas Star Wars is this multimedia phenomenon where maybe it started as films, but Star Wars is not just films. And that couldn't be farther from the truth to say Star Wars is just film.
Yeah, Star Wars is way more consumed than Star Trek by a huge margin.
Yeah, that's the other thing. And the way it permeates society today. I mean, Star Trek is and was a cultural phenomenon. I would never say that, but Star Wars has defined a generation. Star Wars is something that a lot more people are familiar with than Star Trek. There's the 2 Star franchises, but people do not think of them in the same way.
Right.
So, really awesome question, Tristan. We super appreciate all of our patrons and all of their questions. Thank you so much for asking them. Please continue to submit them. If you want to see your question answered on the show, just head on over to patreon.com/Star Wars Station. You can check out all of our tiers and all of our rewards. And if it's something that fits into your life that you can make it happen, we would love to answer your questions on the show. Colin, that's how the Force works. I think now it's time for us to hop right into the HoloNet news segment because we have got a ton of news to talk about. We didn't cover the news on our last episode because we wanted to, pay our respects to the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. But now we're back on the news train. We got a lot to talk about. So let's get right into it right now with the HoloNet news.
You made the HoloNet.
Colin, our very first story on the HoloNet News is one we didn't get to talk about last week. It happened, I think, the day before we recorded. And so that is the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser experience is closing for good at Walt Disney World. So no more Galactic Star Cruiser. If you didn't get on the voyage, you got until August, I believe, to get it done, and then it's gone forever.
Well, and you have to pre-book it. I'd imagine all the spots are booked. If not, you better get there fast.
I don't know if all the spots are booked. That was their problem in the first place.
Well, I mean, when you put a hard date on it, that was my hope, is that they. So the big question here is why, and so there's two reasons, and they both have to do with money. I think the biggest one, obviously, it was really expensive to go here. It was a 2-night stay in a big long experience, like a dinner theater type thing, but it was between $5,000 and $6,000 just for 2 people to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's a huge barrier to entry for all but the most hardcore fans. And at the same time, there are a bunch of Instagram influencers who got to go for free, seemingly. And if you want to experience it, vicariously, just go back and watch their Instagram videos or something. And it didn't seem like have you ever been to a dinner theater? They're fun,
mm-hmm.
but it's fun for one night. And so the cost to go is expensive, but then the second one is the cost to maintain. And so the point of this whole thing was an interactive Star Wars experience where you got to pretend you're on Starship, interacting with actors on this starship, who are the chefs or the bartender or other Starship spacefarers or whatever you want to call it. And there's theater interactions. Like if you Google some of the images, it's Kylo and Rey having a lightsaber fight up in a gantry or something, or on an upper deck or something like that. And so you got to be part of the story. Well, for a bartender to be in character the whole time on this thing is some really high demands for some individual to be. So their pay was probably higher. Their training was more intense. Just the demand on these individuals was more than just a casual cast member or even somebody who dresses up as Mickey for a few hours at a time. This person had to be on deck, batting 1,000 for this immersive experience. And I just don't think the cost could bear what was needed for this. I mean, obviously it closed, right?
That's something I'm really happy to hear you talk about, because it's something that I thought was lacking from the commentary. I've heard a lot of people covering on this, is that obviously everyone's talking about the cost for the consumer because it is staggeringly high. I mean, again, like you said, I wanted to be able to save up and go to it, but it wasn't going to be something that I saved in a year. It was $5,000 to go. Like, it was going to take a little while to save. And for the average working person, that's what it was going to take, was a long time to save. So the perception of its rollout was already that this is a, luxury experience for either the wealthy or for an influencer who gets to go for free. And so there was a bad taste in people's mouths surrounding the price, and it never improved. But then I heard a lot of people, when it was shutting down, they're like, I wanted to go so bad. Why didn't they just, lower the price? And Disney is still a company that still wants to make money. And like you're saying, they have this massive overhead cost, not to build the thing, but to maintain it. It's not like there was a fixed cost of, we are going to spend X amount to build this Star Wars experience. We will not spend a dime more, and then we will recoup our money over this amount of time. No, every single day, whether the rooms are full or whether they're vacant, you're paying all of these actors. You're paying for all of these people's experience. And if you're not paying if there is not a full hotel to witness this experience, then Disney is losing money, because they're betting on every room's full all the time. and this is how, or, they have some percentage calculator for their hotels on times of year, and they've got all kinds of sophisticated algorithms to predict down to, how many beers are going to be consumed on Tuesday of this year to know that this is the money they're needing to make at their place. But that math did not ever come out to lower the price. Maybe it came out to, if you lower the price a couple $100, you're going to get X amount of people in. And they were like, oh, yeah, but that's not going to work. They were never going to lower it multiple thousands of dollars for people to get in there, because that would have just been losing money more. They would have lost money at a slower rate, but they still would have lost money.
It was a balancing act that just wasn't there.
Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't maintain it.
Exactly. And, it was a really cool thing. I wish I could have experienced it. Bummed I can't. It's neat that it was canon. Bummed that now there's some canon story with Chewbacca that I will never know about. I mean, I can watch a YouTube video on. But it's not, I'm not lamenting it that bad, because it was going to be a $5,000 spend in a decade. And so
yeah,
it wasn't. It's sad to see it go, but while it was here, it wasn't something that I was captivated by anyways. And the one thing I will say is, you had mentioned the influencers and that they got to go. I will say, from everybody I've spoken to or heard from, it's influencer or, just a regular person who got to go, everybody has said it was a wonderful experience. I really haven't heard a bad thing. Not that it was worth the money, but that it was awesome. That, they loved it. They loved the experience. And so it was definitely worth paying for. It just might not have been worth the $5,000 that you needed to pay for it.
Right. Especially for working people.
Yeah, well, exactly. Especially for working people. The next story is another story more about Disney as a whole, more about the parent company, because of the trend that this might set. This story is that there are multiple titles that have been removed from Disney Plus, and it's to save money. It's for cost-cutting reasons. Bob Iger's gotten in there. He's kicking down the door. He's saying, we're losing too much money. We're hemorrhaging subscribers over at Disney Plus. They reported 4 million lost in the most recent quarter. And so seeing this kind of cost-cutting measures coming is not a surprise, but a lot of people are bummed out. A bunch of things that I didn't really notice, or that I didn't really watch or realize were going to be cut, have been cut. There were things like the Mysterious Benedict Society, The World According to Jeff Goldblum, and Big Shot. Those are getting cut. I'm sure that there are audiences out there for those things. I'm not saying that no one's watching those. I wasn't watching those. I didn't know that they were getting cut.
Never even heard of some of those.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But somebody did. I mean, they had a whole team of people make them. Like, there are actors and artists involved in this that they put their blood, sweat, and tears into, and someone was watching it, but apparently not enough people. But the big one, the one that really flashes at you as a Star Wars fan, is Willow, in that a TV show made by Lucasfilm that was a sequel to another Lucasfilm product that came out 6 months ago, already removed from Disney Plus. And that's pretty staggering. I was very surprised about that one.
Yeah, I think the ratings were extremely poor on this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a combination of, for all of these things, is a combination of, they don't want these, because there's been other stuff long before Disney Plus. There's Disney movies that aren't even talked about. When they unlock the vault or whatever, these movies don't get released. Right. They're in the back being covered in dust. And that's where I think these things are going to end up, just because they're quality. And then, if they're on these platforms, there's probably some agreement in place that if they're on the platform and have even the potential for plays, that some royalties have to be paid. Yes. And, so I'm not 100% sure what to think about that, because these people put a lot into it. But, where the rubber meets the road, you got to put money in the bank. So.
It's definitely the royalties. I'm curious if they're going to shop these around to other streaming services. Will Netflix buy Willow? Perhaps. I don't actually know the answer to that. But then I'm curious if they're going to do that. If they're going to vault them, like Disney has been known to do for decades, before digital media was even a thing. Like you said, they vaulted their movies. Maybe in 20 years, they're going to be like, it's the 50th anniversary of Willow, or I guess it wouldn't be 50, and whatever anniversary of Willow, we're going to release this long-forgotten TV show, and maybe it'll have some kind of renaissance. But the real answer and the real reason, like we've talked about, is cost cutting, and that's why they're getting rid of these things. And so some of these things will never see the light of day again. There's going to be nobody that will watch these. The only people who are ever going to have access to these are people who have bootlegged all of the Disney Plus catalog already. And so it's a little concerning in the direction of streaming service content that, what if this was something you really liked? I mean, and it's not going to happen. I've seen Chicken Littles going, what if they take The Mandalorian off? And it's like, dude, come on. Like, that is the least reasonable thing for you to ever think. They are not going to remove The Mandalorian. Yeah. But you have no indication that they're not going to remove, I don't know, maybe the Star Wars shorts they put on YouTube. Those might be locked away forever. And it's like, those have some sources that are cited on Wikipedia. Like, those things exist for Star Wars fans in a way that they wouldn't exist for fans of other media. And so to see things vaulted like this, or to see things permanently, basically obliterated out of existence, and that they only exist on the hard drive of some Disney computer is pretty worrying, insofar as I don't hope the trend continues. Or at least I hope something that I love doesn't get snapped.
Yep, good points.
So the next story is really, really sad. And so we have to take a minute to talk about this. Again, this broke last week, but we had already said we weren't going to do the news for that episode, and it did break the day the episode came out. And so we wanted to make sure that we had time to think about this, had time to sit down with it. And that is to report that Ray Stevenson, the actor, has died. He passed away at the age of 58. And there's nothing you can say other than this is extremely sad, and that 58 is much too young for someone to lose their life. Yeah,
he was an accomplished actor. He's not going to be somebody that pops your head like Tom Cruise or somebody in that. If you scroll through his what he's worked on in the past, he was in the Clone Wars. He was Gar Saxon, right? Mm-hmm. One of the most notable things is he was the Punisher, and that film, I don't know if it did very well. It's not the first Punisher film people think of when you think about the Punisher, but people love that character. He did a phenomenal job as the Punisher, and I am so looking forward to him as Baylan Skoll as in Ahsoka. Right? We don't know anything past his name.
It's going to be really interesting watching Ahsoka with this knowledge and with this information. Knowing of his tragic passing, that I don't know what kind of decisions they're going to change in the story for the next season, because we don't know where Baylan Skoll's story goes from here. But it's definitely there's going to be a tinge when he's on screen to know, this is Ray Stevenson's last thing, as far as I understand, as far as what I know that he's recorded for, and this will be the last premiere with him on screen. And so it is definitely going to have a change on Ahsoka, but it's always, it's obviously it's sad when anyone passes away, but especially someone at 58. That's just not an age that you want to hear of somebody passing away at.
Right.
Our next story is also in the vein of casting, also in the vein of actors, and that is Mark Hamill has recently made some statements that a lot of people were surprised about, and one that I was really happy about. Mark Hamill, in an interview with Esquire, he talked about a lot, but one of the main things he talked about was how people talk about he's going to play Luke Skywalker forever. They can do a whole post-Return of the Jedi series about Luke that Mark Hamill can be in. And Mark, one, said they don't need to tell those stories, which I disagree with you there, Mark. But he did say they could get an age-appropriate actor, which I do agree. I really like the way they've used the deep fakes so far. I thought Tarkin and Leia and all of the deep fakes that they've come up with have worked fine. They've looked fine. They've felt fine. I haven't really had any problems with them. But I don't want a whole series following around deep fake skin face Luke Skywalker from Mando Season 2. I would much rather see them cast someone who looks like Mark Hamill and just let that actor breathe and let us see their performance. And so to hear Mark Hamill not just say he's willing for recasting, but that's the direction they need to do, is get an age-appropriate actor to fill his shoes in that era. I'm very, very happy to hear Hamill say that.
Yeah, and this isn't uncharted waters, right? We got Alden Ehrenreich playing Han Solo, and we want him back. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason that as Alden ages that he can't play Han Solo in other medium, in other films or TV shows or whatever he wants to do. And the same can be true for Luke Skywalker here. I have no problem with it. And potentially we're running afoul of some sort of conspiracy theory deal where AI is going to take over and do all this stuff, and I don't want that.
Right.
You know, I don't believe in something like that, but I'd rather go with, instead of like an actor having their face covered up, take the thing off and let's do that.
I agree. I mean, look,
you know, for a little bit, that's fine. You know, show up in Mando Season 2, we can do that, or Book of Boba Fett, we can do that. But if we're going to have a Luke Skywalker centric something, it's got to be a different.
Yeah, look, the deep fakes for cameo's sake are fine. You know, if they're in it for a couple minutes and it's definitely like era appropriate, like if they were to ever make some content between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back and Han were to show up for a couple minutes, then yeah, go crazy, deep fake Harrison Ford's face. They're already going to do it in the new Indiana Jones movie. But we don't need an entire TV series following a deep fake around. I mean, that's just not, it's you will notice. If you watch a whole hour of TV with deepfake guy, you're going to totally notice it. And so, if you've ever seen those behind-the-scenes set photos from the Book of Boba Fett of Graham Hamilton playing Luke before they put the digital crap on his face, the guy looks like Mark Hamill. He looks like Luke Skywalker. Like he looks like young Mark Hamill. If you told me he was his kid, I wouldn't believe you because I'd think they were twins. Like, they look identical to each other. And so, why are we sitting around saying that we need to put a skin mask on this guy? He looks like Mark Hamill. Just let him go. Just say, Graham, we're giving you a season of Luke Skywalker TV. Go wild. No, nobody's going to care. No one's going to be up in arms about the recast. They were worried about the recast for Solo, for Donald Glover playing Lando, and for Alden Ehrenreich playing Han. That wasn't anybody's problem with that movie. There are tons of different problems that people have with that movie. I love Solo, but for people who don't like it, that never even tops the list that they recast them. That, they should have done a deep fake. No one says that. That wasn't the problem with that movie. And so that was successful. Like you said, this can be just as successful. They can do it without missing a beat. And if you really want to get into the weeds of it, Ewan McGregor is a recast for Obi-Wan Kenobi. Ewan McGregor is not the original Obi-Wan Kenobi. I understand the technology was not there at the time to deep fake young Alec Guinness.
Alec Guinness wasn't around.
Exactly. But that's the thing, is Star Wars has done fine with recasts before. We have recasts in the can. Mon Mothma, you don't even know that's a recast. She's not as big a character as Luke Skywalker, but nobody even complains about it.
For that matter, guys being in masks the whole time. You know, the Star Wars set the precedent on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's, people are up in arms about Pedro Pascal's recent interview where he was like, it's mainly a voice acting gig. Well, it is mainly a voice acting gig. You don't walk around and say James Earl Jones isn't Darth Vader just because he's not on set. So it's, there's all these people that might make hay for some YouTube clicks, or they're going to get faux upset and fake outrage. But when you really boil it down, general audiences do not care about the recasts. They don't care if the actor was actually in the suit or if it was recorded in a sound booth. They want good stories, and good stories are going to come with real actors.
Right.
Colin, the next piece of news that we have to talk about is something that is pretty exciting. It's surrounding Star Wars TV, and it's going to be really, really cool. And that is that Tamura Morrison is reportedly playing Captain Rex in the new Ahsoka series.
Oh, that'd be great. I hope that is true. technically we saw him in the Obi-Wan show.
Mm-hmm.
Not Rex, obviously, but the Clone Wars veteran on Dayu, right? And, that was Tamura Morrison, so maybe he went from one set to another and they recorded some stuff. We get to see that. But no, the only thing that might give me pause on that is Tamura Morrison was pretty vocal when he didn't get to come back for, what was the last thing we were talking about that he didn't show up in? Oh, yeah.
He was upset.
Mando season 3. Yeah. He had some comment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So surely he'll let us know if this is true.
Yeah, I think we would have heard by now if this was a rumor or not. So I think it's happening. It's really exciting. The question mark is, are we getting like 100-year-old Captain Rex, or are we getting flashback Captain Rex? And I don't know, because we know Hayden Christensen is reprising his role for this. So is that Force Ghost Hayden, or is that flashback Hayden, or is it both? And the same could be true for Rex. And so it's going to be really, really interesting to sit down and see Tim on screen and see where they took it, because people complained about the way he looked in Boba Fett, and there was a pretty good excuse for that he was digested by stomach acid, and that's why he looks so much older than he needs to be. And so if he's playing old man Rex, that won't matter at all. But if he's playing young Rex, they're going to de-age him, and they're going to use this technology we were just talking about. And so if they do that,
right,
what's the fan reaction going to be there? And so I'm really, really curious to see the direction they take it. But when I saw this, it just put a really big smile on my face. It's going to be super cool. The only thing I'll say is that I hope people are not jarred when they realize that Captain Rex's voice is not going to come out of Tamura Morrison's mouth. That D. Bradley Baker is not sticking his hand up Tamura Morrison's butt and puppeting him. Like, it's gonna sound different. He's gonna sound like Jango Fett. He's gonna sound like Boba Fett. Like, he's gonna sound like a live action clone trooper. And we've never seen Rex in live action, so that is gonna be different. If you've heard Rex he was in all 7 seasons of the Clone Wars, and he was in 3 seasons of Rebels. So if you've heard this character for 10 seasons of television sound one way, it might be a little jarring for him to sound different.
Yeah.
Colin, the next piece of news is really exciting also. I think you'll be pretty pumped about this. And that is, and this one, I don't think it's confirmed, but this one is a pretty verifiable rumor. I mean, it was on a bunch of major news outlets. It was reported by all kinds of people. This one I'm reading comes from Kotaku, and they say that Ubisoft's open-world Star Wars game is coming sooner than we think. And that sooner than we think is reported to be an early 2024 release date.
Boy, that'd be something. I hope that's the case. I hope it's along the lines of the combat we see with Cal Kestis in Jedi Survivor and these other games. Because it's just fun. Getting to interact with other players on that stuff, and like a co-op mission or something like that's going to be over the top. I love games like that. I played WoW for years. SWTOR, like I said earlier in this podcast.
Now, I don't think it's not an open world game like that. It is not going to be an MMORPG. I think it's not that. This is from the makers of Assassin's Creed, so it's going to be much more like Assassin's Creed 3 kind of open world. In that direction. But open world's a tough concept with Star Wars, because like, what do you mean by open world? It's like there's not a engine out there that's going to be able to run the Star Wars galaxy as an open world. Like, your laptop's going to catch on fire. And so what do they really mean by open world here?
But it'd be instance, like you go to Coruscant, you go to this planet or that planet, and it'd be a massive game on your hard drive, literally. But you do missions just like Grand Theft Auto or something.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, I understand how an open world game works, but when you talk about Star Wars, it's how far are you willing to take it? Like, what does an open world game mean? Because there are so many planets. This isn't even talking about novels and comics or even TV shows. If we just take the planets in the movies and say you can visit every planet that's appeared in a Star Wars movie and it's an open world, that is still massive. I think it's bigger than they could possibly manage.
Comes on your own external hard drive.
Exactly. And so that's what I'm saying, is that the open world concept is super exciting, but it's what does that really mean? And you will always have detractors. They're going to come out with this open world game, and someone's going to be like, well, there was a wall, and I couldn't go this way on Coruscant. And it's like, come on, man. Like, what are you doing here? Right. But I am really, really excited to hear this report. I'm hoping that it rings true and that we really are getting a new Star Wars game without a title that we haven't heard about in less than 12 months. I'm skeptical, but it would be really cool.
Yeah, that'd be great. And given this writer's strike, we're going to need something to do then anyway.
Yeah, you're right. The next piece of Star Wars news is one that has me really, really excited. This piece of Star Wars news is so ridiculous that it has me this excited. But that is that they are releasing the Star Wars 2015 comic book run, issue 38 through 75, in an omnibus. And this was announced yesterday.
Wow. That's going to be fun. I need to pick those up. Have you read any of those?
Well, so I am an omnibus collector. I used to collect comic books, and I don't anymore. I say I'm only going to collect trade paperbacks and omnibuses. And so for trade paperbacks, that's easy. Any limited series they come out with, they're going to pop onto a trade paperback, 5-issue limited series, and I'm going to be able to put it on the shelf. The omnibus game is way, way, way riskier because they don't make very many omnibuses. Omnibuses are reserved for either big limited series or ongoing comic books. And so the Star Warses that have received omnibuses are the first 2 Darth Vader runs and Dr. Aphra's comic book series and the first 37 issues of the Star Wars 2015 run. But that got released. That's been released twice, a first and a second edition, and it got released years ago. And so I've been telling myself that I'm going to collect these as trade paperbacks and omnibuses, but that for the ongoing series, I'm just going to wait till they put them out on omnibuses. I was really, really losing hope that not only were we not going to get a Star Wars 2020 omnibus, but that they weren't even going to put the second half of the original Star Wars comic in an omnibus. And so this announcement was a wash over me. I was so excited to read this because I have not even read those comic books yet because I've been waiting on the omnibus, and they've been out.
Yeah, you've been anticipating.
Yeah, those comics have been out for 6 years, and I haven't read them yet. And so I've been waiting, and finally the announcement came yesterday. So I knew I had to fit that into our news segment.
Yeah, that's going to be fun to read.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, it's, and now it's an old series. It's old hat. But for me, it'll be brand new. Really excited about it. And then, Colin, our very, very last piece of news it's news. It's more of like an announcement, but it is news. Today, May 31st, 2023, you can turn your Disney Plus on. All 4 original Indiana Jones movies and the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles are going to be on there.
Yeah, this has me so excited because I've watched Raiders of the Lost Ark with my kids. I've watched Temple of the Doom with my kids. I don't want to go digging through my DVD case that's ancient to find the third one. What is that? What's the third one called?
The third Indiana Jones is The Last Crusade.
The Last Crusade, yeah. So we're fixing to watch Last Crusade. I don't even know if I own Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So get to watch that. And then are you going to watch the Chronicles? Isn't that what that's called? The TV show?
Yeah, I'm absolutely watching the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. I've never seen them before. So I can't wait to see them. I mean, I'm really, really pumped. That's the first thing I'm going to watch.
I haven't seen them either.
I don't own the indie movies on DVD. I only own them on VHS, and I don't own a VHS player. So I'm also really pumped that they're getting released because I basically only have the opportunity to watch the Indiana Jones movies when they're on television. And so now I'll finally be able to have them on demand, and I'm super excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and then getting to watch it with my kids. And with the Dial of Destiny that we're going to go to, they're going to be completely primed and ready to see.
That's good.
I cannot.
I'm glad you're going to be able to get them all studied up on Indiana Jones before that one. That's going to be important. How old is Katie?
Katie's 9 and Charlie's 5.
I was 11 when the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. And my Kingdom of the Crystal Skull story is, I mean, it's not good. I'm I am not a hater of any Star Wars movie. I have my favorites, and I have the ones that I don't like as much, but I'm not a certified hater of any Star Wars movie. I will say I'm a certified hater of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And sitting there in that chair on my 11-year-old butt, I'm sitting there, and at the end of the movie, I realize I am now old enough to know if something is good or bad, because I knew that this was the first movie I'd ever seen that was a bad movie. And so that's my Kingdom of the Crystal Skull anecdote. I really hope that Katie, being 9, is old enough to recognize it, and I hope she can walk away and say Dial of Destiny was a good movie.
My hope is with these movies especially, and a few others here and there, Star Wars obviously being another one, is that, you're sitting there Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Sunday after church or whatever, and you're like, what can I do? You put a movie on. And for me, it was Temple of Doom, Raiders, all these other things. And that's what I want to tell my kids is popping these just fantastic old movies in to watch them and just to veg out on the couch, right?
Yep. You're absolutely right. I totally agree. I hope Dial of Destiny is awesome, but it's going to be really cool to hear you get to share these movies with your kids in an awesome way. And I'm happy everybody gets to do that. I'm happy that it's on Disney Plus. So if you're listening to this podcast, right after it's over, go pop Disney Plus on and go watch an Indiana Jones movie, because you're going to be happier having done it.
Yep. We're so looking forward to watching that new movie.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Only 29 days from this recording.
Yep. Yep.
So, Colin, that wraps up our really long HoloNet news segment. We had a lot of news to get through. A lot of exciting stuff's happening in the world of Star Wars, and so we had to cover it for you guys. But now we're going to hop into a little bit more about our personal Star Wars journey and our personal lives, because we are going to talk about the Star Wars moment of the week.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Colin, what is your Star Wars moment of the week?
I kind of want to combine two of them, because we didn't do one last week, and these are so relevant to what's going on, what we did. So one, I was anticipating what our podcast from last week. So I put on Empire Strikes Back. And what prompted me a little bit also was my son comes up to me, because we had read the Star Wars books. That's another moment of the week. If you'll scroll back and listen to some old podcasts, was my son. We did the original trilogy in his little golden books. And so he's like, I want to watch the movie where Luke Skywalker gets his hand cut off. It's like, and so we watched that. And before that and since, my kids have been playing with lightsabers, putting the Darth Vader helmet on that I have sitting around. That's what I'm saying, these iconic moments of that Darth Vader helmet, and between him and Luke Skywalker, chopping his hand off, and the iconic line, "No, I am your father." And it's just so heartwarming to me. It's just the best. It get to experience all this stuff with my kids. It's so fun. And then to build on to that, another family Star Wars moment where we were watching in our last podcast, even at the very beginning of Return of the Jedi, and so many iconic lines that permeate culture. And so the next day, my wife and I are walking along, and she's talking to an employee, and she says, "I hope so, for your sake." Well, and for his sake. She was talking about a third person. It wasn't some negative thing. We're talking about an employee. But these lines are ingrained in our psyche. We watch these as children. We pass along to our friends and neighbors and peers. And I hope so, Commander, for your sake, is the line officially in the movie. But people say these things and don't even realize they're a movie quote. That might not be true, but that's my supposition on it. And yeah, it's such a cool thing to experience out there. Because I was walking along, she said that. I'm like, that's a movie quote, right? She's like, what? I'm like, and I pulled it up on the phone. I can play her. Thank goodness for this technology. We can do this today. I played it for her, and she's like, oh, yeah, huh? And to me, we had just watched this movie the day before, and she's out there saying that. It's such a cool thing.
Yeah, that is a cool thing. That's awesome. That is a good moment. It's crazy that Star Wars is able to permeate our culture so much that your wife didn't even know that was a Star Wars quote, but that it hits home with so many people who don't even realize it. So,
yeah. What is your moment of the week? I'm anxious to hear it. We haven't talked about it.
No, we haven't. We also didn't have a moment of the week last week. My moment of the week is actually Legends related. I am reading a Legends book that I've actually never picked up before, and a lot of people are always really surprised when I say I never picked up this book before, but you guys already heard me say it. I am now reading the Darth Bane trilogy for the first time, and the reason I'm reading the Darth Bane trilogy is because of our book club that we have here for Star Wars Station. I promise my moment of the week is not intentionally a plug for the book club, but without the book club, which was voted on by our patrons who are members of the book club, I presented them a few options. I think it was 6 books that I thought might be good entries into a certain point in the Star Wars universe, and whichever one everyone was interested in reading. And the one that was unanimously chosen was Darth Bane, Path of Destruction. And so I'm reading it for the very first time, and I'm in the first 10 chapters of it, and it is phenomenal. I mean, I understand why people consider this to be one of the best Legends books. Sometimes people say it's the best Legends book. It is really, really good, and I get why people like the Old Republic so much. I'm already super enjoying it, and I'm only 10 chapters in.
Yeah, I'm on the book club as well, obviously, and gosh, it's a phenomenal book. It ramps the action and suspense and thrust into that Star Wars universe. It ramps it up to 11 right at the beginning. It's so fun.
Yeah, it really does. It's an almost immediate, thrust into the Star Wars universe. It feels Star Wars, and the time period, like, it can be felt. You can see that it's older than the movies, and that's important for you to get the context of when it's taking place, but it doesn't feel like ancient or anything. It's got a good, fresh Star Wars feel to it, and you never don't feel like you're steeped in the universe. Even with these brand new characters and a brand new story, it's been really, really good.
Excellent.
And so I've really enjoyed reading that. It's been awesome. And I would encourage anybody who enjoys Star Wars reading or who listens to this podcast, you should really check out the Patreon and get interested in the book club, because it's been a lot of fun. It's been a really good way for people to talk about the books and for us to just already get introduced to new Star Wars content, even Colin and I.
Yep. So reading books is the best. We have lots on the pot for this Legends and canon continuity. So much fun, and we talk about it all the time.
Yeah, well, we've already talked about how next month, June, it'll be tomorrow and running through the month, it's unofficial. It is the unofficial Star Wars reading month at Star Wars Station, because we're going to be covering some really, really exciting stuff in the next 3 weeks. We're going to be covering the original Timothy Zahn Thrawn trilogy to help us build up towards the Ahsoka TV show. We're going to do Heir to the Empire 1 episode, Dark Force Rising another episode. We'll end with The Last Command. And we are going to fill June with Star Wars reading because, one, reading is so important. Colin, you as a parent know that people need to continue to read from 0 to 100. You should always be reading. And also, there are so many amazing Star Wars stories told between the covers of a book that you're not going to see on screen for, any number of reasons. And so to get these stories, you gotta dive into the book. You gotta listen to the audio book. And so we are really, really excited to be doing all of this involving Star Wars reading.
Yep. So much stuff down the pipe. The Thrawn books are beyond phenomenal. How much fun they are.
Yes.
The character development that like you're back with the gang, Luke, Han, Leia, and Lando.
And I think with Dave Filoni being familiar with the series and with obviously just the Heir to the Empire name drop in the Ahsoka trailer, it's going to be exceedingly important for people to pick up these books. And so we're just trying to get ahead of the curve to help you out, help you cover these books. And so we're excited. And that's kind of just a preview look at the next couple of weeks here at Star Wars Station. But Colin, that wraps up our podcast today. We super appreciate everybody who listened this far, who listens to us on a regular basis, or if this is your first time listening to us, we really appreciate you joining us. Station Nation is growing every day. We keep getting new followers on Instagram and Twitter. Our listener numbers continue to increase, and we are just so blessed by that, guys. We really appreciate all of the engagement with everyone who listens to us. You guys just being a part of the Star Wars community, talking to everybody has been awesome. It's been great to share this podcast with everybody, and we don't have any plans stopping anytime soon.
Now, the future's bright. We got a lot going on, and it's not just with Star Wars, Harry Potter, Warhammer, and personal projects that we don't even want to get into. We spend the next 2 hours talking about that, too.
Right. We've got...
But, yeah, Twitch, Instagram, where else? Patreon.
We've got all kinds of exciting stuff. If you want to get involved with the Star Wars Station community, it's super easy. You can get involved however much you want. We have tons of people who DM us on Instagram and talk to us all the time. You can find us on Instagram at starwars.station. We got memes cranking out over there all day, every day. So we hope that everyone who is come to us from the Instagram or who might have found us as a podcast and then find the Instagram, that you enjoy our content over there, that you continue to help us grow over there. On Twitter, it's basically just scorching hot takes all the time. It's just Star Wars stream of consciousness in the best way possible. We continue to grow over there too. I love engaging on Star Wars Twitter because it's a bunch of stuff that I didn't think of, or people are introducing new topics. There is something to argue about on there. And so it's been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate everyone who follows us on Twitter. Like Colin said, we're on Twitch. I was streaming Jedi Survivor. I've obviously taken a break from that after I beat the game, but we're always streaming stuff over there, so be sure to check us out on Twitch. Our YouTube, along with having these podcast episodes, also has some fun shorts that Colin and I put together from time to time. You can find us there, Star Wars Station on YouTube, and we're at twitch.tv/Station Media. We've got a lot of really exciting stuff, guys. We've got our Patreon. Our Patreon community is just the absolute best. Everybody over there is engaging with us all the time. They're super fun. It's great to have you guys along for the ride. And you can join that Patreon community starting at just $1. And that $1 gets you access to our Discord, to an exclusive Discord with just patrons. It also gets you access to our exclusive Instagram story with just patrons. We share a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. We share a lot of, insights or random thoughts that we might not share on the podcast that everybody can get a chance to check out. All you got to do is go over there to patreon.com/Star Wars Station, and there's tiers for all kinds of stuff. If you're really enjoying the RPG, you can get an RPG t-shirt over there. You can submit names for places and locations and characters for the RPG. You can submit questions on how the Force works. You can play video games with Colin and I. You can get a care package sent from us. You can be on an episode of ARC Troopers. You can listen to our episodes of ARC Troopers. I mean, we have got a ton of stuff over at the Patreon that is worth checking out.
And it's so fun to make this, so fun to engage with everybody. I mean, we're learning every day, growing every day. Come join us. We just gave away a Darksaber.
We did just give away a Darksaber.
We'll have a new one
We
soon.
did just give away a Darksaber. Congratulations to Mandalorian Mark on Twitter for winning that Darksaber. I won't give out his Instagram handle because it's a little more of a personal Instagram, but on Star Wars Twitter, he's Mandalorian Mark, and he's got some great takes. And so congratulations to him on winning that, and we love doing those giveaways. They're a lot of fun.
Yep. I can't wait to hear the future. It's for this podcast, for Star Wars, and we're going to bring it all to you.
We absolutely are. We thank you guys so much for listening. We thank you all for being a part of Star Wars Station. We thank you for being a part of Station Nation, and we love bringing this to you every week. Catch us next week for our Heir to the Empire review. So I hope you're looking forward to that. Please come listen. It's going to be a lot of fun. Colin and I have pages and pages of notes to talk about how the book is, the review of the book, how we think it's going to relate to Ahsoka, where Dave's going to pull ideas from, where it's going to diverge from Ahsoka. I mean, we just got a ton to talk about. You do not want to miss that episode. So be sure to tune in next week for that. And until then, keep it wizard.